Hi everybody, welcome back to Geezer Rider. In this episode we're going to talk about GPS and navigation tips. We're not going to go into depth on any particular system or manufacturer. There are enough videos out there that cover those. This is more generalized tips for both honestly novice or experienced riders. So regardless of whether you're using an integrated system, something that's built into the bike's infotainment system, or you're using an add-on GPS or the GPS in your phone, these tips should apply. So the first is actually something that I've had some discussions with other people on, and I've heard support for both ways of receiving the audio prompts. So my bike has an infotainment system where I can receive the audio prompts through the speakers. You may also have the ability to send the audio prompts through either a wired headset or Bluetooth connected headset somehow. Or if you're using your phone, for example, or another, external GPS, a little Garmin or, something along those lines, of Magellan. Some of them have Bluetooth built in, and you may be able to send them to a headset or integrated comm system in your helmet. And the reason I bring this up is I actually had a personal experience with this, and I've heard others tell the same tale. And one is privacy. Everybody doesn't really need to know your business. They don't need to know where you're going. And I had somebody say something to the contrary to that. I was like, well, yeah, but if they hear the announcement, they know where you're going. Well, here's my caveat to that. And this is something that I had happen to me when I first was getting used to the bike, and this is a recommendation I have for everybody else. Make sure you know the rest of the systems on the bike first before you start dealing with GPS or navigation. It actually does take a fair amount of your focus to listen to the instructions or look at the screen, and that's a sight line away from the road for a while, and that's thought away from your controls in your environment. So especially if you're a new rider, make sure you understand the bike, its functions, your environment, and all the other accessories that you're using on the bike before you try and use navigation. And I'll chime in with something else about that in a minute. So I had this new bike. I got used to everything and decided to use the navigation. Hadn't picked out my Bluetooth comm system yet. So I was just using the bike's speakers. And the prompts for the navigation were excessively loud. And that was just because I hadn't become familiarized with that section of the infotainment system yet, where you could preset the volume level of those prompts to something lower. So, Roz from Monsters Inc. was yelling out, recalculating, and everybody in a 5-block radius could hear it. It was almost blowing the speakers out. And what happened was I went up to a turn and I had the original GPS map in the bike. I have not yet paid for an update, and I'll double back on this for a minute. And the information was actually wrong because the map was old. So the bike was a 2016. I think this was in late 2017 perhaps, or early 2018. And it was summertime, and the cars around me had their windows down, and the nav announced that I should turn right, left, whatever it was. The information was incorrect or not optimal. In any case, that wasn't what I was going to be doing. A driver heard that and was in the wrong lane for their turn and assumed I was going a direction based on what they heard and wound up cutting me off. And in a moment of clarity, I, instead of like losing my temper or whatever, we had a quick little exchange. I'm like, what made you think that I had to yield to you? I've got the right of way here. And he goes, oh, I heard your GPS say you were going to turn. So I knew I could go. And I was like, oh, okay, this is something we have to work on. So either keep the volume low enough so that only you can hear it over road noise and everything. That's still not going to preclude others from hearing it, but preferably if you wear a helmet and you have comms in your helmet, or you have a headset on, or some other way of receiving the information, you can avoid that situation. I realize that's kind of nitpicky, but again, if you've been watching my series of videos, I always try and bring up something that somebody else might not have thought of, even though it's a very specific and rare use case. It just gets your mind thinking about other permutations, other situations that could arise that would lend to that. So I have since moved my nav prompts to my helmet, and life is good. One of the reasons that I like that is that I can hear them clearly regardless of ambient noise. And you would be surprised, with a really loud speaker system, you think you would hear it, but by the time, it stops playing your music or your stream or whatever you have going on, your podcast, and switches over and gives you the prompt, sometimes what was that going on? But because it's mixed in with all the other background noise, you've got a lot of other things you're processing when you're riding. Whereas if it's right there up in your head, I tend to pay a little bit more attention to it. So something to think about. The other thing that I would suggest for anybody new to the system that they're using, or new to navigation on a bike at all, and this is whether it's integrated, you have an external GPS, or you're using your phone, is to put in a route you already know, with lots of turns, maybe even where it requires a U-turn, and preferably with a highway exit if you can, of some kind, or on-ramp, off-ramp scenario, and run that route and listen to the prompts and see, hey, did these make sense for the route I'm going? I know this route, I run it, maybe it's your commute to work, whatever it is, something that well, and see that the prompts that it's giving you, and the instructions and the directions it's giving you, and the what lane it's telling you to be in, make sure that it all lines up. Like Garmin GPSs, where if you don't have lifetime map updates or something, or if there's a map integrated into the bike's infotainment system that you didn't want to pay $170 for the update for, may show you a wrong lane position. The highway's been rerouted or added lanes or something since then. So you want to get to know what it's going to do. And one of the ways to do that is to travel a familiar route. The other thing you're going to find out when you do this exercise is, when do you get your prompts? How far ahead of the turn? Does it tell you a half mile ahead of time? Does it tell you 800 feet ahead of time? Is it giving you enough time to position yourself and process the information and maneuver in traffic and get to where you need to be? The other thing is, if you are a person that rides faster than the prevailing traffic, and I'm not advocating that, I'm just pointing this out, the GPS usually thinks, hey, this amount of distance is good. And if you're going 10 miles faster than the prevailing traffic or the speed limit, you may get your prompt a little late. So you need to be aware of that, and then you need to look into the options for your system, where you may be able to actually go in and tweak and tune that to give you a more advanced notice. The other thing is, if you only get one notice and it happens, 3/4 of a mile before you get there, you might be looking at something else when it comes time to make the turn and blow by your turn. So also you want to look into those features, options, tweaks, tuning parameters, and see that, hey, I get one at this far out, and one right before the turn or something like that. Set it up to whatever works best for you. And again, do that on a known route. And I will comment again about when to make those adjustments here in a little bit. The other item is that verify that a route that you put in and the results you got make sense before you travel, if you're not getting real-time updates. So some built-in infotainment systems, or even the external GPSs will have some kind of a live feed for traffic or construction or something like that. If you don't have that and you're not using Waze or Google Maps or something on your phone that provides that feature, when you get your map entered and you look at it before you go off, you should go through the turn by turns, assuming this isn't, a 6-day trip. You don't want to go through all those turns, but, especially the route that that we talked about earlier that you take, go through and make sure that those directions make sense. Is it telling you to go off-road on an unpaved road and you're on a bike, which you prefer not to do that with? Or conversely, it's all toll roads and you'd rather take the scenic route. And I talked about, where there's been road work and things have changed and maybe the exit is no longer valid or the number for the exit isn't valid. Take some time to validate online that the route still makes sense, that the information that it's giving you is valid. And there's 2 ways to handle the result. If it's not valid, you can either update your maps or use some other form of navigation, or you can just make a mental note that, hey, when it tells me to do this at this point, what I really need to do is something else. I think that's a little bit strong of an ask, because on a longer trip, there might be a lot of that, and that's just, I think it's another hassle that you don't need to deal with. So, either use something that has real-time updates, or perhaps, pay for the updated map at least, even though sometimes they seem to be cost prohibitive. Get your map updated. Subscribe to traffic or construction alerts, or use a device that does that for free, like your phone, Google Maps, Waze, etc. The other is, be sure your avoidances and exclusions are set to your preferences. So what does that mean? Okay, so avoidances, avoid toll roads. And often the route, unless you're deliberately trying to stay on the scenic route and you don't want to be on the super slab for a while, this can add a lot of time and aggravation to your trip, unless you meant to do that. The other thing is, I mentioned unpaved roads a moment ago. You can go into your nav system usually and tell it to avoid unpaved roads. So you're starting to get a sense of some of the options that are there. And for a lot of you, this is, a no-brainer. You already know all this, but you're probably used to all this stuff with your car. With your bike, it's a lot more important to know road conditions and if it even is a real road. I've been on some literal dirt paths that were marked as a way to get between A and B, and I honestly, wouldn't have purposefully chosen to go down that route, and went into my avoidances later and said, hey, show me a route around this if possible. And inclusions are, hey, show me certain waypoints. I want to see if there's a gas station of this brand, or a restaurant, or a dealership, or what have you. You can set inclusions for things that you want to know about. Again, be wary of creating too much information for you to process, and also that it gets so chatty that while you're riding, it becomes background noise. You're likely to miss something important because you're getting too much feedback about waypoints or sites of interest or things like that, and only you can judge what your happy medium is for that. The other part, doubling back to going on your known route, is getting used to your GPS and nav systems controls. There may be a need to do something to either adjust the volume of the prompts, or tell it to find an alternate route on the fly. It really does detract from your attention trying to do that while you're riding. And my next tip is actually don't try and input trip information into the GPS while you're riding. Pull over somewhere safely, put in your new route, and then go from there. You just really don't need the distraction, and that really is immersive in multiple ways. You're digitally involved, and by that I mean your hands are involved on there, so your mind is on there, your line of sight is off the road. That's just a bit too much going on. So for the few things that you might need to do while you're riding, you should get to the point where you really don't need to look away, or don't need to look away often. If it's built into your bike's infotainment systems, hopefully you have handlebar mounted controls, or if you have a touch screen you have to deal with, you already know where on the screen you need to tap, and you can look it away at a moment when you feel it's safe and go right there, and not be dawdling staring at the screen instead of the road. So this is a short one, just a few tips to keep you rolling. Hopefully it helps you enjoy the experience more, and ride safe. Namaste.